Did you know that the man who became a hero to millions of people all over the world was actually a fake? In today's video, we're going to tell you everything about the secret life of Clint Eastwood and how he hid all the bad parts of himself. So, get ready and watch this video till the end. Clint Eastwood came to Hollywood as a man who was really hard to figure out. And for many years, that mystery became his best hiding tool. People saw a calm, controlled man with a strong presence that almost never broke, even when everyone else in the industry was being dramatic. But underneath that act was a life full of secrets, cold behavior, and a habit of keeping parts of his life totally separate from each other. People thought they knew him because he always seemed the same on screen. But that sameness was actually a perfect cover. He never said no, he never admitted anything, and he never tried to explain himself. He just kept moving forward while his silence did all the heavy lifting. His early career set the tone. During his time on the show Rawhide, he built the cool and quiet personality that stuck with him for every decade after that. People he worked with remembered him as polite, private, and impossible to get into a real talk with. Even back then, there were rumors about affairs, being controlling, and suddenly switching relationships. But those stories went away because people liked the cowboy who never broke character. Hollywood bosses saw how powerful this image was and put all their money behind it. Eastwood made them lots of money, and no studio wanted people asking too many questions about the image that kept their bank accounts full. As he got bigger with Italian Western movies, the gap between who he was in public and what he did in private got even wider. He worked with Sergio Leone, got really good at saying very little, and became the face of a new kind of tough guy who stayed quiet. That quietness also protected the personal life he kept spread across many different relationships. During these years, he had children who nobody knew about at the time, something that was confirmed later through records and interviews. He was in relationships at the same time without ever saying a word about it. People who worked close to him said he could be warm one second and then totally shut down the next. This up and down behavior stayed hidden because he never let reporters get close enough to see it. His marriage to Maggie Johnson followed the same pattern. Long times away from home, long breaks apart, and secret relationships became just normal life for him. When the marriage kept going, it only kept going on paper, while his real life was going in many different directions that nobody saw for decades. Public records later showed that he had kids during that time that he didn't admit to until they were grown up. The world saw a solid and stable man, but that stability was just a picture, not real life. As he got more into directing, he gained a kind of power that kept people from looking too closely at him. Actors said he was focused, fast-moving, and didn't like it when people talked too much. That way of working got him awards and respect, but it also created a space where nobody ever questioned him. People just accepted that he was in charge without asking for any honesty, and this let his private life get more and more complicated. Relationships started, fell apart, and overlapped. Partners found out the truth only after years of being with him. Some people found out through tabloids instead of from him directly. These stories didn't come from gossip. They came from interviews, court papers, and personal statements that came out long after everything had already happened. Online communities started to look more closely at these patterns. People online pointed to the number of kids he never admitted to, the overlapping relationships, and the repeated stories about how cold and distant he could be. Online conversations pointed to real reporting from places like the Los Angeles Times and other news outlets that had written down the timeline of his personal life. The internet age made everything louder that earlier decades had just ignored. People started asking questions about how he treated his partners, how he didn't really stay connected to the families he made, and how he let the public see only one version of him, while a totally different version was living a completely separate life. By the time he got to the top of his directing career, the differences had become really hard to miss. He made movies about fairness, doing the right thing, being brave, and facing the results of your actions, all while keeping his own mess completely hidden. Critics noticed this. They pointed out how a filmmaker who made stories about duty and sacrifice often avoided taking responsibility in his own personal life. These criticisms came from real interviews and real reporting, not just made-up stories. But because Eastwood never responded to any of it, the whole debate turned into a quiet kind of frustration. People wanted answers from a man who had built his whole career on never giving them. As new articles brought up old details, a picture started to come together. It showed a man who spent more than 30 years living two lives at the same time, keeping his public reputation while private things fell apart around him in ways that stayed invisible because almost nobody dared to put all the pieces together. His accomplishments were real. His impact on movies was undeniable. But the personal world he built behind that success showed a pattern that made people rethink who they thought they knew. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a long and careful system of keeping secrets. But everything came crashing down when the truth finally came out. The truth that Clint Eastwood kept hidden for decades didn't come out through him admitting it. It came out little by little through birth records, court papers, public interviews, and quiet acknowledgments that showed up long after the harm had already been done. For years, he walked through Hollywood like a man who believed his private life could stay locked away forever. But that lock eventually broke. And when it did, the full picture of his hidden life made people face a pattern that had been building since the very beginning of his career. One of the first things that came out was confirmed reports about kids he never admitted to while they were growing up. News articles explained how he had a daughter in the late 1950s and never publicly said she was his. That only came out decades later when she reconnected with brothers and sisters who had also grown up away from the spotlight. More things came out after that. Reporters wrote about more kids from relationships that overlapped in ways the public never knew about. Each new confirmation made the gap even bigger between the controlled public image he showed and the complicated private reality he kept going. During this time, online conversations got louder. Comment sections brought up these reports and asked why a man who built a career on being strong and in control avoided taking responsibility for the families he had created. Critics pointed to his history with Maggie Johnson, a marriage that stayed on paper while he was living completely separate romantic lives for long stretches. People referenced interviews from women who talked about long relationships that ended without warning once they found out he had been splitting his time between more than one partner. These accounts didn't come from gossip. They showed up in published articles, TV interviews, and court papers that became public record. One of the most talked about stories was about Roxanne Tunis. Their relationship lasted more than 10 years, and during that time they had a daughter together. The relationship existed while he was still married. But he never publicly said anything about it until much later. When that truth came out, people online asked how he managed to keep such a big part of his life hidden from both Hollywood and the fans who thought they knew him. Sondra Locke's story became another major turning point. Her published memoir and court papers showed a relationship that lasted more than 13 years. She described a world built on promises, shared work, and the feeling of security, only to find out he had other long-term relationships going at the same time. When their time together ended, legal fights followed. Court records showed financial arrangements, property issues, and career roadblocks that she connected directly to him. These details were widely covered by big national news outlets. Once people saw the full size of the conflict, the conversations got even more intense. Online communities debated whether it was okay for a man to keep multiple lives going at once while carefully managing how much of it ever reached the public. The pattern kept going with Jacelyn Reeves, a flight attendant whose relationship with Eastwood produced 2 children. Their identities weren't known to the public until they became adults. Records and interviews later confirmed the timeline. People online pointed to this chapter as one of the clearest examples of his double life. They talked about how the kids grew up completely outside Hollywood, while their dad kept a worldwide reputation built on strength and independence. As these stories came out, the internet rebuilt his personal history in real time. People on forums looked through articles from People magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and Vanity Fair. They noticed the same pattern repeating over and over again: long relationships, overlapping commitments, and sudden endings. Public reactions got sharper. Some people argued that his private life went against the values he showed in his movies. Others saw a planned pattern of emotional coldness. The criticism wasn't about one single mistake. It was about how long the secrecy lasted and how many people were hurt by it. Critics also went back and looked at his relationship with Frances Fisher. They dated in the early 1990s and had a daughter together. Interviews from that time showed how emotionally invested Fisher was and how much she hoped for a long future together. Their relationship ended suddenly. Shortly after, the public found out he had already started something new with Dina Ruiz, who he later married. This timeline raised more questions online. People pointed out how each chapter of his personal life seemed to end only after another one had already started. As more information came forward, The internet looked at how his silence had helped shape what people thought of him. People asked whether his silence had protected his family or just protected him from having to answer for what he did. Conversations on platforms like Reddit and Quora went back to old stories and compared them to new reporting. Many people criticized how he would wait years before admitting anything, and usually only after the people involved had already spoken up themselves. These critics pointed to real interviews where former partners talked about emotional distance, sudden endings, and never getting any real closure. By the time all these revelations came together into one full picture, viewers could no longer watch him on screen without thinking about the world he had built off camera. Every new report added another piece. Every interview from a former partner added another voice. The gap between his legacy as a filmmaker and his choices in his personal life became impossible to look away from. His accomplishments stayed real, but the way he had structured his private life revealed a depth of secrecy that even longtime fans were stunned by. The relationship between Clint Eastwood and Sondra Locke started out looking like a real partnership and creative team. But over the years, it turned into a fight over control, influence, and power. Locke's memoir and the court papers she filed show just how deep it went, something she described as manipulation, being pressured, and being left behind emotionally. The story starts with the trust she had in him, built over shared projects and being close personally, and slowly turns into a story of being deceived that went on for more than a decade. Even before the lawsuits, she wrote down private patterns that the public couldn't see. Those patterns included constant secrets, overlapping lives, and a level of control that ran through every single interaction they had.